Okay, well, welcome back to Sid Mac YouTube channel. So today's little hobby project is, I got an idea. I thought I really like Adirondack chairs, and I built just a real basic idea. Then I threw it out on Facebook and I asked people, let's finish it together. So give me ideas. So a lot of ideas were a lake setting at the morning time. So we're gonna try and put those things together today. And this is just real basic concept of the chairs, and we can start adding to it and see how it comes out. Okay, so the very first suggestion was an alpine lake. So we found an alpine lake, and it's very full of pine trees. And so if this is our perspective, so I'm trying to imagine that my forest is right around here. And I need a couple of little clouds so that I can put some very early morning sun on. And in the early morning, when you have the pink skies in the morning sometimes. So I found some ideas online that show early morning clouds that are just general. And then we've got our forest, and then back here is a further forest, and then way out here is another forest. So the lake appears to have some closer perspective here, and it kind of drifts out towards this area. So we'll make those trees much, much smaller, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm making a baby blue, really soft. And I'm doing that by bringing in some white and a touch of blue and a little tiny, tiny, tiny touch of the darker blue. Because the more baby blue it is, then we can easily bring in those pink clouds. So in this particular painting, I'm not using gesso, and because I kind of want to be able to see, leaving all these blank areas, that's where the pink's going to just kind of fit in there nicely. So I'm just mixing as I go, and then when we come back, we'll start adding in the pink clouds. So we're just scrubbing this color in. Doesn't have to be, I like it dark in the corners, and maybe darker towards the bottom, because that's still part of the nighttime, just kind of waking up. So we want to be darker down here in this corner, and then kind of blend it out that way. But most of our pink will be coming from this side. We're gonna pretend that this side of the picture is the east and this is the west. Okay, so on our palette, I have added some purple to go with our baby blue using our white. And because this is dawn, I'm going to add my purple towards the bottom of our sky, because it's still, you know, the morning time's coming in, still dark on this side. I'm using also this paintbrush is called a filbert. It's more rounded, and that's going to help me move in a circular motion in here. So this part of the sky is now much darker to represent the evening is passing, and this is going to be our morning coming in. So now what I'm going to do is start phasing in a little bit of the pinks to bring the sky into a dawn setting. And the reason we don't go past this is because this is our tree line. So our trees are going to be really little in here, and they're going to be much bigger here. So that's why it really doesn't matter what's going on in here. We'll bring in the lake as we move down into the picture. Okay, so we have our pink sky, our little white clouds, our lighter side of the sky, our darker side of the sky. So the sun's coming up this way. Might even bring this up just right in here a little bit more. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna mix a really dark green, a little bit of brown, a little bit of blue, so that we can start fanning in our little trees and move on. Okay, so now I'm just mixing, taking this dark green, a little bit of brown, a little bit of blue, not much, but a little bit. Getting this really, really dark color, because that is going to be our color to put in our trees. And we're gonna start our tree line here, big, and then we'll go little here. Okay, so next what would happen is you would normally put in your sky down here because that's your lake. But we're kind of going through this one step at a time. So what I have to do now is imagine where our beach is, and if it's really even a beach. Usually at a lake, especially if you're in an alpine lake, there's not really much of a beach. So what I'm gonna do is just gonna identify this little area here as the shoreline. And I'm not going very far out because I wanna have maybe some foliage in here, this area here. And all this matters so that we can put in our lake. So that's gonna be our shoreline. And then what we'll do is, because it's a lake, we're gonna have a mirror image of our forest. So what I'm gonna do now is go ahead and put in the lake, and the lake has to mimic our sky, but it's a little bit darker because it doesn't have the sunlight yet, which actually is helpful. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna allow a little bit of room here for my reflection, right in there. So what you're gonna see on the time lapse is you're gonna see me putting in the sky, which is our lake, and our reflective pinks. Very little. There seems to be like the majority of the pink here is in this general area. So when I pull in my blue, I'm gonna go lightly in here because we want our pinks to show up really nicely. And the picture that was offered in the Google Images has a little bit of mist, and we're going to add that at the end of the painting. So let's move on and get the lake in. Okay, so we have our lake basically in, but what I wanted to stop and talk about is, now that we're getting really close to the chairs, I'm gonna switch brushes. And I'm gonna go really small and find a nice square tip. So this is a nice square tip. That will allow me to get into the angles and continue the color in here. And then we'll make this a little bit more clear to balance out the pinks in here and here. And then we'll move into our tree lines to finish off the reflection in the water. Okay, I'm gonna do a little trick. I'm gonna flip this over. And that way I can keep an eye on my trees using my technique this way. And then that way I can kind of get as close as I can to those peaks. Okay. It's not super easy. It's not super hard either, but the idea is to kind of get in there in a way that you're still making it look like it's a reflection. Carefully, of course. You can always fill in the gap. And we'll add our shoreline in there too, and then that will help it come together. And I'm going to switch brushes to the little guy. I have a really tiny little fan brush here, and he's a little bit more helpful to get in those little peaks. So he comes in like this. Okay, add a peak. These are the tips of the trees. Now sometimes they'll show you in other videos where they go in oil. In an oil class, you can totally make that reflection move inside the water. With acrylic, it's not as easy. So what I do is I put in my trees first as best I can, and then we'll add that shoreline, and that'll help. I'm going to come back into that area. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the darkest color I can and fill in these little areas here. Like that. Okay, so what we're going to do carefully is we're going to take this little dry brush, nothing on it, and I'm just going to pull down, taking some of that excess off. So again, in oil, you would go back just like that. And that softens and it gets all the hard edges off. So the only thing left to do now is I'm just going to fill in this area here with that really, really dark color. And then we'll go on to the next step. Okay. So super carefully with just a little bit of lighter color, I put some brown and let's see, it's like a light brown and a green and a white to kind of make a mud color. And then what I did was I just kind of visualized where I thought the tree line, where the trunks of the tree probably is, putting in this line and making a curve, is an actual curve there, and then down, and then around here. That way we kind of have an idea of where our land begins and where our water line starts on the other side of the lake. So now what I'm gonna do is, it's just like blocking. That line is gonna serve us for lots of different things. We can put in rocks, we could lighten up some of the trees sporadically. I wouldn't do the whole forest, I would just do pieces of it. And then I might even, as time moves on, we'll see how dark we need to make that line, or if we just leave it alone. So then the next thing we're gonna work on is probably a beach concept. We'll go back to the comments on Facebook and see what we need to put in there. Okay. Okay, so now as we move closer into our photo or our picture, we kind of have the baseline of what our dirt area would be, and then kind of the concept of the greenery around it. And then what we can do is we'll take a smaller paintbrush, and we'll get in the nooks and crannies and kind of finish off that. And then we'll move into the idea was somebody suggested that they would be fishing in the morning. So I was thinking, since we don't really have a person in our chair on them, we could definitely do that. But sometimes when people go fishing, they'll take a bucket and they'll put their fishing rod on it. So I was thinking we could leave this kind of open, not painted all the way in, so that we could put a little bucket here and then maybe have the fishing rod coming out into the water. Okay, so I was doing some time lapse, and I noticed that we, for some reason, wasn't recording. So just let me show you what I did so far. I finished my bottom blocking, and then I kind of lightened it up and I made a path. So we can work on that as a path. And then I also added a little bit more white streak lines to indicate water, still water, and basically filled all the blanks in. So now we'll start working on more details. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and sketch in a bucket. So if we imagine our little bucket, you have to think about the size of that little bucket and where it would kind of show up, so to speak. So if my bucket's here, we just start out small, just for reference, just a little bit. And what we're doing, blocking it in. And the thing about the bucket is you want to kind of block it in. You can always modify it. Now, because it's acrylic, we have to kind of let it dry a little bit. And then if this guy has a bucket, chances are his buddy has one too. So this guy's bucket, because he's a little bigger, so I try to stare at it and see kind of where that bucket might end up. So I'm just going to start with a little square, And then I keep modifying it just a little bit, maybe making it taller. Little baby steps here. And then that gives us just a basic shape. And then we come back to it and we just keep adding more little details. Okay, what I want to show you now is as the buckets are drying, I'm able to add more detail. So what I did was I'm adding white on the little bucket. Then I threw in a little bit of red. And the idea is to just kind of assume that there is some sort of label on the bucket. And then after it dries, the little bit of red, then I'll come back through with some, maybe a dark gray, and outline the right sides of both buckets because they're in the dark. And so that will allow the light to come from that morning light. It'll hit the left side of the bucket and the right side of the bucket will then be darker. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just start adding a lot of greenery. And because it's Alpine, so I can't get too crazy because up on top, you know, it's going to be less foliage. So what I'm just going to do is patchwork in some green, and I'm going to use all kinds of different colors. And the more color you add, the different variables, then you can kind of throw some other ideas in there. We also probably need to add a rock somewhere. So usually what you do to one side, you do to the other. So like I said, I'm just sort of patchworking this in here. My paint is a little wet, so it's, you know, kind of being stubborn. So what I'm doing is I'm just basically throwing color at it. And I have to be careful because on one side, you know, our light's coming this way, so we don't want a lot of light behind this general area. So I'll just throw some color, basically. And I thought we'd figure out a way to put some rocks somewhere in here. And we'll lighten up our path. Our little buckets came out pretty good. And usually when if you put in a rock, it's basically just a square-ish. And then you lighten one side. So maybe that's a rock. And then we put another rock in here. And then we'll have to lighten one side of it because of that morning light. Maybe the morning light only hits this part of the rock, for instance, maybe. Something like that. Okay, let's see how that goes. And then we'll keep moving on. Okay, so I've added a couple little rocks. They actually look better on film, as you can see. So we got some rocks in there, and what else? So we put in some greenery, and right now we're in just that stage where we start to add a lot of little details. So we'll just keep showing as I add things. We'll have to document what we did. Okay, so I've made a little bit of a pinkish purple, and I'm going to start on this side, and I'm just going to put a little tiny line, really faint, in different areas of the lake. And this is going to give it that flat look. And I'm just adding little tiny bits, carefully, of course. And now this side, I contemplate that this side is getting a little bit of light, not as much maybe, because it's in the darker side. And then out here, on the bluish, the most blue of the lake, I'm going in with the white lines. And they're random. Okay, that's pretty good. And then we can reassess as we move along, but that looks pretty good. Let's see. As you come back out, it's looking more and more still. Now what I'm going to do on this side of the forest, I'm just going to take a little bit of this pink, so slight. This is a really small brush, and I'm just touching the right side of the trees, just like that. Very little. The idea here is that this side of the tree is just catching that morning light. So there's not a lot of light, but it's just catching a little bit. And this will help open up the forest a little bit, gives it a little bit more definition. And I only do this side of the lake, just like that, because this side's still dark. This is just getting those morning views. So the base of our picture is the Adirondack chairs. There's a lot of blue in here, and there's a lot of brown. So a contrast color would be an orange. But because this is a rustic nature picture, we're going to use a little brown, and we're going to tone down our orange so it isn't so an obnoxious color. We want it to be a complementary contrast color. So my idea is I'm going to start bringing in the orange, and we're going to make the brown, of course, dictate in between to give it a rustic feel. Soft and kind. Hey baby, the sky's on fire. I'm dying, ain't I? I'm going to Carolina in my mind. If I am gone to Carolina in my mind. In my mind, I'm going to Carolina.
see the sunshine as it entered this field of shine. Ain't it just like a friend of mine hit me from behind? Till I'm born Carolina in my mind.
Okay, so the purpose of that last clip is that when you paint, in this case we're painting furniture, put on some music, just like if you were really finishing real furniture. Just take your time, relax. There's no right way, no wrong way. And the beauty of doing it in a relaxed fashion, just like you would if you were, taking care of an old dresser that you wanted to repaint. It's the same thing with painting furniture on a canvas. You want it to be slow, relaxed, and just let your ideas flow from one paint stroke to the next. You're always giving it a new thought, how you want it to look. Maybe I want more orange in here, and maybe some in here. And the other thing I'm doing with this piece of furniture is I'm painting downwards, because when you look at a wooden piece of chair, generally speaking, they're going to have those pieces of the wood facing down, and then maybe one this way as the support beam for the back of the chair. Okay, so now we're going to speed this up and you can see this get finished. Okay, to end this video, I'm just going to add a few more shadows, and then this painting will be done. Thanks for watching.